Okay, I'm just gonna wait a second for folks to join in, and then I'll get started. All right, let's see if make sure that the live is working there and kicking in. All this wondrous technology. Okay. All right, let's see here. I think the live is working, and I think we have folks joining in. So, as the great philosopher Sweeney Todd once said, welcome, come on in. So good to see you. I'm glad that you're here. And thank you for joining me today. So I have some really cool stuff to show you today. So let's dive right in. Let's go right in for it. Before I begin, though, let me show you this and see if you can tell me. I'm gonna put this up close. You probably know what this is, but see if you can tell me what the handle is made from. Okay, so I'm going to give a nice close look here, and hopefully you can see. I'll try to do it at different angles. See if you can tell me what the handle is actually made from. What material is it made from? Hey y'all, thanks for joining. And here, let me turn it around this way. Okay, can you see it with different angles? All right, let me do a pass by of the camera. All right, there's a pass by the camera, and then I'll go on this way. Okay, pass by the camera. All right, so see if you can tell me what the handle is made from, and then later on I'll talk about it and I'll get into it. Okay, so let me show you this. I wanted to show you this because, all right, well, first of all, let me tell you what this exactly is. Okay, unfortunately, it's reversed in the camera. Ooh, Pearl, Jan Harris Pearl, that's a really good guess, and Izzy says ebony. Those are great guesses. Not correct, but great guesses, so keep going. Let me show you this, okay? This document right here. And there's a couple of reasons I want to show you this. One is just really cool because this is actually, and I know it's reversed in the camera, unfortunately, but this is actually a land grant that was deeded to James Monroe back in the late 1780s. And so this was actually given to him, or excuse me, no, it wasn't in the late 70s. It was a little bit later than that, but it was actually bequeathed to him by our friend. And I don't know if you keep this. Fortunately, the signature is reversed right there, but it actually is. If you can read in reverse, it actually is Patrick Henry. So it's signed by when Patrick Henry was governor of Virginia, signed by Patrick Henry. And this is a land grant deeded to James Monroe for over 5,000 acres, which was given to him after the Revolution, in terms of the Revolution. So this was given to him. They think it was actually over in Kentucky, and it actually says Western Lands in here. And so it was signed by Patrick Henry, and of course, James Monroe and Patrick Henry, they met around 1782 when they were both young fellows back in the day, and Monroe was a delegate from Virginia. So let me show you this. I'll show you the back here, okay? And I really wanted to show you this for a couple reasons. Unfortunately, I'm not going to take it out of the frame, so I know there's a little bit of glare on there. Unfortunately, I'm not going to take it out of the frame, but you could see where the wax seal would have gone. But the reason I wanted to show you this is because this is made out of parchment, okay? And I've actually had some questions recently about, they're talking about parchment in the old days and parchment. What exactly is parchment? Is it paper? What is it? So let's talk about it. So parchment, what exactly is parchment? It actually is not paper. Parchment is actually, it's either lamb or it's here. Let me show you this up. Can you see that really close? It's actually calf skin, sheepskin, or goat skin. That's actually, it was scraped thin and drawn out and used as a writing material, to write on. So it's actually not paper itself. So when you're looking at this, parchment kind of looks like paper a little bit, like we think of the old-fashioned, but it actually isn't. It's actually lamb skin, goat skin, or calf skin. And it's actually, so in that sense, in a way, it's sort of leather in sort of a way. Not exactly leather, but, it's both made of skin of animals. And, they say that they started doing that. Oh, here, let me show you this up again. They say they started doing that around the 4th century AD, when it was used a little bit earlier by Syrians and Babylonians and things like that. And It was actually sort of replaced papyrus paper in a way, and some people say that it was replacing papyrus paper because the papyrus reeds were getting harder to harvest. You know, maybe that's true or not. But you know how they made this? This actually, they would soak it in lye, and so you can imagine. So they would take the skin of the goat or the calf, and they would soak it in lye. Okay, they remove all the hairs from it. So you have the skin itself with the hair going up again, and you sort of scrape, and they would scrape off the hair in the lye. The lye would actually loosen the hair on it. So if you have a skin of an animal and you start soaking it in there, and the lye would sort of actually loosen the skin of it. It's kind of morbid a little bit, but you know that's why they always talk about that on true crime shows and everything. It's true. So it would loosen the hair off, and they would scrape it really thin. Okay, so that's sort of the key. You know, leather wouldn't be as thick, or leather wouldn't be as thin. Leather would be thicker, right? So with the parchment, they would actually scrape it really, really thin, and then they would stretch it out. And you can see that a little bit. And they would let it dry, and then they would sort of just let it dry out, and therefore you would have it. So then what is vellum? Okay, people ask, well, what is vellum? Well, vellum is parchment, but it's specifically calf skin. So it's the skin of a calf, of a cow calf. So that's what vellum is, a little bit more delicate. And so whenever you hear the terms parchment, vellum, paper is different. Then you have parchment, which is made out of goat skin or calf skin, and then you have vellum, which is specifically made out of the calf skin. So that's what vellum is. Whenever you think about that. And it was used for many, many years. And, you know, they say even the Benedictines, when you always see those bound books with the beautiful writing in it, that they actually had their own supply of cows and of cattle specifically for that purpose, specifically for the purpose of making parchment and making vellum. Paper, so then, and paper is different. You know how they make paper? Okay, so with paper, back in the day, they would actually pulp up, they would pulp up rags, old cotton, old cloths, old fishing nets, things like that. They would pulp it up, and then they would strain that pulp up. Have you ever taken a paper and just sort of scrunched it up, or cut it up and put it in water? You'd see that it would get sort of this pulpy mess that it sort of happens with it, and that's what they do. So they'd pulp it all up, and then they would strain it in strainers, okay, and then press it out. And so that's where you get the term rag paper, with newspapers, because a lot of them are made from those old rags. It wasn't really until later that they started using trees wood, pulping the tree wood specifically, around 1800, if I'm not mistaken. They started doing that in Germany. But in the early days, they would actually take old rags and things like that. And you could still do that to this day. So if you ever want to do an interesting project at home, you can use your old clothes you have an old piece of ripped up jeans or something like that you're about to throw up. You can pulp it up and you can make paper out of it. And there's plenty of videos to show you online. So it's sort of an interesting thing. So that's the difference. And you can spot parchment. If you have a document and you're not sure if it's parchment or paper or not, you can spot parchment very easily, because honestly, if you look really closely at it and you take a magnifying glass, you can tell that it's skin. You can see little tiny cells and little tiny things like that. You can actually tell that it's skin if you look very closely. Plus, parchment is going to be a little bit stiffer whenever you hold it up to the cells, and whereas paper is not going to be quite as stiff, right? So that's one way that you can tell. And I was talking about Patrick Henry and meeting James Monroe when they were young fellows. I wanted to show you this too. This is kind of interesting. This is a engraving, or excuse me, not an engraving. I spoiled myself. This looks like an engraving, right? This is actually a painting by Alonzo Chappell. Now, what's interesting about it is that it looks like an engraving, right? And it was commissioned by him for his 4-volume work, National Portrait for Eminent Americans. It was painted in 1861. And this is what's called a gouache style, and I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but it's Goachehe, if I'm not mistaken. A specific style of painting that it's actually used with watercolor, and it dries to a matte finish. So that's why it looks like it does. And he probably used a specific technique because he was going to use it as an engraving, and they're going to actually copy an engraving off it. So I just thought that that was really neat, because this is a painting that looks like an engraving, and it's on paper. And let me show you the actual engraving that it was done off of. And there's the engraving, okay? And this is it was painted in 1861. So there's the painting, and then there's the engraving. So I just think that's really neat how they how it was actually painted, and the way that it paints, it looks like an actual engraving. Oh, hey, Irene. Yeah, it is a beautiful portrait. So this is James Monroe when he was a young statesman, and still youthful and all that sort of thing. So there he is, the young James Monroe. Okay. So I asked you earlier, I wanted to show you this, and I asked you earlier what you think the handle of this is made of. Or first of all, what is this? These are actually, there's two of them. These are actually James Monroe's razors, and they're actually traveling razors. They would have gone to his traveling kit. Okay, let me show you up close. And let me pull this out here for you. Look at that. Talk about Sweeney Todd. There you go. Look at that razor right there. And of course, this is silver on here. Can you see the engraving on the silver? It's probably a little not focused as well, but I'll try to get it a little bit closer. See the engraving on there? Bone, that's a good one. Irene, buffalo horn, that's really good. That's a really good guess. This is actually made out of tortoiseshell. Okay, so you guys are really, really close. This is actually made out of tortoiseshell. You're right that it's an organic material. And you could tell tortoiseshell because it has these sort of spotted kind of look to it, okay? Spotted kind of look. So you know how they would do that is, they would cut the piece of the tortoiseshell, and then they would do the rough shape, okay? They would actually do the rough shape of the tortoiseshell. And then in order to get this polish, they would start sanding it down and getting it higher and higher grit, so that they would get finer and finer grit. And then they would eventually buff it out. Bew Robbins, you're exactly right. So that's how they get that polish on there, is they just keep buffing it out, just like any other material. You see that a little bit in ivory and stuff like that, and you see that on metals and things like that. And how they would do this blade, okay, so razor blades are very specific, okay? These would have to be extremely high carbon steel. And what I'm talking about is whenever you see like a fireplace poker, okay, that's just usually regular iron or low carbon steel. And what do I mean by low carbon steel? It is what it says. It actually has low carbon in it. So you're looking at a carbon content of below 0.6, something like that, below 0.6%. So usually, like low carbon steel would have like a 0.15% carbon, whereas this is going to have a much, much higher carbon content. So it's going to have probably about 0.8% carbon. And there's actually steels today called 1080 steel, which that's what it's referring to, that the 80 is the percentage of carbon that's actually in that. And how they do that is they would, one of the ways that they used to do that actually to apply the steel is they would take a bunch of the steel bars, okay, and then they would pack them in these big metal boxes, and they would put carbon in there, and they would sort of just like fire and sort of burn and force the carbon into the steel. And that's one way that they can do it. That's just one method of doing it. So what they would do, now the key with, you can't just have the high carbon steel when they would make in these old razors, okay? You can't just have the high carbon steel and call it a day. You would actually, the trick is in the heat treat process. So they would heat it up to about 1600 degrees, maybe about, they would forge it out and cut it out. Maybe something this small might even can just be ground out. And they would heat it up to about between 1500 about 1650 degrees, and then it would get that cherry red. And one way you can tell is if it's ready to quench in the oil to get it hot, is it would go non-magnetic. So you could take a magnet and you would put it on there at around 1600 degrees, and it wouldn't stick anymore. So the magnet wouldn't actually, so you could see it whenever you go in the forge, you get it about, about 1000 degrees, and the magnet still sticks on there. And then you get to, 1000, 1200 degrees, and it starts to think about it. And then you get to, the magnet will still stick on there. And then you get to about 1500, 1600 degrees, and the magnet will not stick anymore, just pop off. And that's when you know it's ready ready to heat treat. And so then they would take that and they would just dunk it in oil. They call that the quench. So they would quench that in oil. Now, here's another key with this, is that once you quench it in oil, it's super, super hard, okay? And you would think that would be really good for a small blade like razor, but that's actually not good. You don't want it so hard that it's actually brittle. So what they would do is they would temper it. And that's what we call the tempering process. So you have the heat treat, the quenching, you have the tempering process. And the way to do that is you would get it up to about 350 to 400 degrees, especially for a smaller one like this. And you could tell because it will start turning yellow. The metal will start turning yellow, and that's when you know that you're tempering out. And that gets rid of that brittle hardness that's on there, because if it's too hard, it'll actually snap. It'll actually break really easily, and you don't want that. Even though with a razor, you're just sort of you're not really doing a lot of heavy hacking with it unless you are Sweeney Todd, in which case you are. But if you're not Sweeney Todd, then you're not going to do a lot of heavy hacking with it, hopefully. You're just going to be shaving your face with it. And so even in that action, though, you don't want it too hard. And you could see on here, they would have these two slabs of tortoiseshell, okay? They would cut off these two slabs, and then they would rivet it. See the rivet up here? There's a good rivet, and there's a good rivet down here. And you can see that it's sort of clasped together, and that's what holds it together. So that's where you have the razor. A lot of these old razors were polished to a high. Someone was asking if it was Soligen or Sheffield. You know, I'm not sure. There actually is maker marks on here. And one of these days, I need to get my nerd magnifying glass out and discover that. And I'll find that out. In fact, if you want to email me, I can send you the results of that. But here you go, James Monroe's razor. And a lot of people, they think that back in James Monroe's day in the Revolution that people had these long beards and stuff. They actually didn't. People shaved back then. It wasn't until later that you started seeing the beards and things like that. And there's a Revolutionary War period, people were shaved. And if you ever become an extra on like Turn or one of those movie sets, and you show up with a beard, they'll say shave it right now. So because it's not historically accurate. So there you go. Oh, can you see the little sort of indentation on the top? That's typical for shaving blades. A lot of shaving blades are concave blades, which means that the blades, if you're looking at them like straight on, they would go in like this, on this way, instead of flat like that. So if you're looking at a Japanese blade straight this way, it'll be flat like this going in. But these are concave, so they would actually have a curve going into them. And that actually creates a really, really super fine sharpening razor. If anyone remembers last week, I showed you the razor strop, and what they would do is when they would shave this off, you see those strops, and they would get that fine edge on there. I won't go into that now, but the finishing polish of that is actually on the strop, on the where they would strop it on leather. So let's review. Let's talk about parchment. What is parchment exactly? Parchment is goat, calf, or a sheepskin that's stretched out and thinly scraped and dried, and it becomes something to write on. And parchment is not the same as paper. Paper is made from pulp. In the old days, they would make it from rags, old fishing nets, old linens, things like that, or cottons and things like that. And then in the 1800s, they started using trees, unfortunately. And so that's where it goes from there. So that's the difference. So whenever you're talking about old parchment, it's not paper. It's actually it's actually skin. It's actually animal skin. So there's that. And then I showed you this really interesting painting, which looks like an engraving, right? It looks like an engraving, but it's not. And this is painted by Alonzo Chappell, and it's painted in the gouache style, which is Gouache style. And that is a watercolor. You can see it and it's finished to a matte. So it actually has a sort of a matte finish. So it looks an awful lot like an engraving, but it's not. So be careful when you look at these. And then here's the actual engraving that sort of was a result of that. You can see that a little bit up close. All right. I'll put that down there. And then finally, and I know some of you guessed it, here is James Monroe's shaving razor, one of his shaving razors made out of tortoise shell. And there you go. So there it is right there. All right, well, interesting. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I hope everyone's being safe and healthy and doing okay. And once again, if you could give this video a share on your page, that would be amazing. We would really appreciate that. And if you want to give our Facebook page a like, we have all kinds of really, really cool stuff on there. And anytime you have any questions, email me. I'm on the website. Thank you so much for joining in, and we'll see you next time. All right, bye.